When a diner owner followed a paralyzed woman begging for leftovers into an abandoned warehouse at midnight, he expected to find her selling herself just to survive. What he discovered instead would shatter everything he thought he knew about weakness, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be broken by the world. This is the story of two people the system had discarded, a widowed father barely holding on, and a woman in a wheelchair who refused to let tragedy define her, and how a plate of cold food became the beginning of something that would save dozens of lives. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. Now, let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday evening, turning the streets of South Harbor into rivers of trash and forgotten dreams. Evan Carter stood behind the counter of Carter's Corner Diner, watching the water cascade down the front window, distorting the neon sign that had flickered for the better part of 15 years. The red letters spelling out his family name had become a landmark in this neighborhood, not because the food was exceptional, though it was honest and filling, but because Evan had never once turned away someone who was hungry. His son, 7-year-old Marcus, sat in the corner booth doing homework with the kind of fierce concentration that reminded Evan so much of Sarah it hurt. 3 years had passed since the accident that took his wife, and yet there were moments, like right now, watching Marcus bite his lower lip the exact way Sarah used to when she was thinking hard, that made the grief feel fresh as an open wound. "Dad, what's 8 times 7? Marcus called out, not looking up from his worksheet. "What do you think it is?" Evan replied, wiping down the counter for the 3rd time that hour. There were no customers. There hadn't been many all day. The neighborhood was dying slowly, businesses closing one by one as the city's development moved elsewhere, leaving South Harbor to crumble into something between a memory and a warning. 56? That's right, buddy. Good job. Marcus beamed, and Evan felt that familiar tightness in his chest, pride mixed with terror. Every smile from his son was a reminder of how much he stood to lose, how fragile their small world had become. The diner barely broke even most months. The apartment upstairs where they lived had a leak in the bathroom he couldn't afford to fix. His truck needed new brakes. The list of problems never ended, but Evan had learned to carry weight the way old buildings carry cracks, visibly, but still standing. The bell above the door chimed, and Evan looked up expecting to see old Mr. Jacobson coming in for his usual black coffee and slice of apple pie. Instead, he saw her. Maya Reed. She came every Tuesday, right around this time, always in that same wheelchair, an older model, manual, with one wheel that squeaked no matter how much oil she applied. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes that held something Evan had learned to recognize in the mirror. Exhaustion that went bone deep, the kind that came from fighting battles nobody else could see. "Evening, Maya," Evan said, already reaching for the container he'd prepared. He always made extra on Tuesdays, meatloaf or chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables. Good food, the kind that stayed with you. "Hey, Evan." Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. She wheeled herself up to the counter, and Evan noticed her hands were shaking slightly. The rain had soaked through her thin jacket, and water dripped from her hair onto the worn linoleum floor. "You're soaked. Let me get you some coffee first." He didn't wait for her to refuse, just poured a cup of the fresh pot he'd made and slid it across the counter. "On the house." She wrapped both hands around the cup, and Evan saw the gratitude in her eyes before she quickly looked down. Pride, he thought. He understood that too, the kind of pride that made accepting help feel like swallowing glass. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus looked up from his homework, waved at Maya with a bright smile. "Hi, Miss Maya." "Hey there, Marcus. How's school?" "Good. I got an A on my spelling test." "That's wonderful." Maya's smile transformed her face for just a moment, erasing the lines of worry and revealing the person she must have been before whatever tragedy had put her in that chair. Evan packed up the container of food. Tonight it was pot roast with carrots and potatoes, and added an extra roll and a slice of chocolate cake. He rang it up as leftovers, charged her $2, which was what he always did. She gave him exact change from a small purse that looked like it had seen better decades. "This is too much," she said quietly, looking at the container's weight. "It's what didn't sell. Better you than the dumpster." They both knew it was a lie. They both pretended it was true. Thank you, Evan. Really? She turned to leave, and that's when Evan noticed something different. There was a bruise on her wrist, partially hidden by her sleeve, and when she moved, she winced, not from the effort of wheeling herself, but from something else, something that made Evan's protective instincts flare like a match in darkness. Maya, he called out before he could stop himself. Are you okay? She paused at the door, her back to him. For a moment he thought she might tell him the truth, but then her shoulders straightened, and when she looked back, her face was a mask of calm. Just tired. Long day. Thanks again for the food. And then she was gone, disappearing into the rain. Evan stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, feeling something settle in his gut that he couldn't quite name. It was the same feeling he'd had the night Sarah didn't come home on time. The same instinct that had made him call the hospital, even though she'd probably just stopped for gas. He'd been right to call that night. He hoped he was wrong now. The next Tuesday, Maya didn't come. Evan told himself it didn't mean anything. People got sick, plans changed. But he made the extra food anyway, kept watching the door, and felt disappointment settle heavier with each hour that passed without the familiar squeak of her wheelchair. Marcus noticed his distraction. Is Miss Maya okay? I'm sure she's fine, buddy. But the bruise on her wrist haunted him. The way she'd winced, the trembling in her hands that had seemed worse than usual. Dad? Marcus's voice was smaller now. When Mom didn't come home, you knew something was wrong. You said you could feel it. Evan's chest tightened. His son was too young to carry those memories, and yet there they were, shaping the way he saw the world, teaching him that absence could mean tragedy. This is different, Marcus. But what if it's not? What if it's not? The question followed Evan through the rest of the evening, through closing up the diner, through tucking Marcus into bed and reading him 2 chapters of their current book. It followed him as he lay awake in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the drip of water from the bathroom leak he still couldn't afford to fix. He thought about Maya, about how little he actually knew. She'd been coming to the diner for maybe 6 months, always alone, always on Tuesday, always just for leftovers. He'd gathered from brief conversations that she lived somewhere in the neighborhood, that she was on disability, that before the accident, she'd never said what kind, she'd worked in healthcare. A nurse, maybe. Or a tech. She'd never specified. She never talked about family, never mentioned friends. Just came in, got her food, thanked him with that quiet dignity that made his heart ache, and left. What if she was in trouble? What if that bruise meant something worse than he'd imagined? What if... Evan sat up, running his hands through his hair. This was ridiculous. He barely knew her. She was a customer, nothing more. She probably just had other plans this week, or maybe she'd found somewhere else that gave her a better deal on leftovers. But the feeling wouldn't leave him alone. The second Tuesday Maya didn't show up, Evan made his decision. Stay with Mrs. Chen tonight, he told Marcus after school that day. Their neighbor, a kind widow who treated Marcus like a grandson, had watched him countless times before. Where are you going? Marcus asked, his eyes too knowing for a 7-year-old. Just need to check on something. I'll be back before bedtime. Promise. Marcus nodded slowly. Be careful, Dad. The words hit Evan harder than they should have. Be careful. As if his son already understood that the world took people away, that promises about coming back weren't always kept. Always am, buddy. But as Evan closed up the diner early that evening and climbed into his truck with its worn brakes and questionable transmission, he wondered if that was true. Careful people minded their own business. Careful people didn't drive through deteriorating neighborhoods looking for someone who might not want to be found. He started with the obvious places. The public library, where free internet meant warmth and occupation for those with nowhere else to go. The community center that offered discount services. The church that ran a soup kitchen on Tuesday nights, though he somehow couldn't picture Maya there. Nothing. He drove through South Harbor's streets as the sun set, watching the neighborhood transform from merely struggling to genuinely dangerous. This part of the city had been left to rot, block by block, year by year. The good people who remained did so because they had no choice, huddling in their homes as darkness brought out everything the daylight tried to hide. Evan was about to give up, head back to pick up Marcus and accept that his concern had been overblown when he saw it. A flash of movement down an alley between two abandoned warehouses, and there, the distinctive shape of a wheelchair, moving with determined speed despite the darkness and rough pavement. Maya. Evan's heart kicked into a different rhythm. What was she doing in this part of the neighborhood? This was where even the police didn't patrol anymore, where the streetlights had been broken so long ago the city had stopped replacing them. He pulled over, killed his lights, and watched. Maya wheeled herself to what looked like a service entrance of one of the warehouses, a building that should have been condemned years ago. She looked around once, quickly, then worked a key into a padlock that Evan could barely see in the darkness. The door opened. She disappeared inside. Every instinct Evan had developed as a father, as a man who'd lost someone to the unexpected cruelty of chance, screamed at him that something was wrong. Nobody came to a place like this for good reasons. The possibilities flooded his mind, each worse than the last. Drugs, trafficking, exploitation, a woman in a wheelchair, desperate for money, with no one to protect her. He was out of his truck before he'd fully decided to move. The rain had started again, light but cold, turning the broken pavement slick. Evan approached the warehouse quietly, his heart hammering. He should call the police. He should drive away. He should do literally anything except what he was doing. But the image of that bruise on Maya's wrist, the trembling in her hands, the way she'd said, "just tired," with such careful emptiness, all of it pushed him forward. The door she'd gone through hadn't fully closed. Evan could see a sliver of light from inside. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. Voices. Multiple voices. And was that music? Something classical, playing softly. Slowly, carefully, Evan eased the door open just enough to see inside. The sight that greeted him made no sense. He'd expected darkness, squalor, the evidence of whatever desperate thing he'd imagined Maya was involved in. Instead, he saw order. The warehouse had been transformed. The space was sectioned off with clean white curtains hanging from ceiling-mounted tracks. Medical equipment, old but well-maintained, sat on wheeled carts. There were cots, maybe a dozen of them, several occupied by people in various states of injury or illness. And Maya. She was at the center of it all, wheeling between patients with the kind of efficient grace that spoke of years of practice. She was checking an IV on a man who looked homeless, his weathered face peaceful in sleep. Her hands, those same hands that had trembled taking a container of leftovers, were steady now, confident. "How's his fever?" Maya called out to someone Evan couldn't see. "Down to 100.2, a male voice responded. "The antibiotics are working." "Good. Keep monitoring every 2 hours. If it spikes above 101, wake me." Evan stood frozen, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with what he'd assumed. This wasn't a den of desperation. This was a clinic? Here? Run by the woman who came to his diner begging for leftovers? Maya wheeled to another patient, a younger woman with bandages on her arm. She spoke to her softly, too quietly for Evan to hear, but the patient nodded and smiled weakly. Maya checked the bandage with gentle efficiency, made a note on a clipboard, then moved on. There were others helping. Evan counted at least 3 people in scrubs, real medical scrubs, though worn and faded. They moved around Maya like a practiced team, taking direction from her without question. "We're low on gauze again," one of them said, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a bun. "I know, I'm working on it." Maya's voice carried a weight Evan recognized. The weight of responsibility, of problems without easy solutions, of trying to hold something together with will alone. "Maya, you need to rest. You've been here for 16 hours straight." "I'll rest when what? When you collapse?" "You're not invincible." Maya's laugh was soft and bitter. "Trust me, Carol. I'm very aware of my limitations." The other woman, Carol, softened. "I know. I just worry. Worry about our patients. I'm fine." Evan should have left then, should have backed away and processed this impossible discovery somewhere else. But his foot caught on a piece of loose metal, and the sound echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. Instantly, everyone froze. Maya's head whipped toward the door, her eyes sharp and alert. "Who's there?" Evan had a choice: run and leave her wondering, possibly afraid, or step forward and face whatever came next. He stepped into the light, Maya, The words died in his throat as three people suddenly surrounded him, including a man who looked like he'd been a boxer once and still remembered how to throw a punch. It's okay. Maya's voice cut through the tension. It's okay. I know him. She wheeled forward, her face a mixture of shock, fear, and something that might have been embarrassment. Evan, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. He looked around the warehouse, taking in details he'd missed before. This wasn't just some hastily thrown together operation. This was organized, professional, impossible. What is all this? Maya's jaw tightened. For a long moment, she just stared at him, and Evan could see her calculating. What to tell him, how much to reveal, whether to try to lie. Finally, she sighed. Everyone, this is Evan Carter. He owns the diner where I get food sometimes. She looked back at Evan. Evan, this is my clinic. Your clinic, he repeated slowly. You run an underground medical clinic while living on disability and asking for leftovers from my diner. Yes. The simple honesty of it hit him harder than any excuse would have. Why? Because someone has to. Maya gestured around the warehouse. These people? The city doesn't see them. The hospitals turn them away if they can't pay. They get sick, they get hurt. They die in alleys because no one thinks they're worth saving. Her eyes met his, fierce now. I used to be a trauma surgeon, Evan. Before the accident that put me in this chair, I worked at County General, and I was good, really good. But one drunk driver later, and suddenly I'm not a doctor anymore? I'm a liability. Medical licenses don't mean much when you can't stand for 12-hour surgeries. Evan's mind reeled. A surgeon. She'd been a surgeon. So you do this instead, he said quietly. Spend everything you have. Everything I have isn't much. Disability barely covers my rent, but yes, every penny that doesn't go to keeping a roof over my head comes here. Equipment, supplies, medications when I can get them. She laughed, and it held no humor. You know those leftovers I buy from you? That's my food for the week, sometimes 2 weeks if I stretch it. The container he'd given her 2 weeks ago. The pot roast and cake he'd thought was such a generous gesture. She'd probably made it last days. The bruise on your wrist, Evan heard himself say. Where did that come from? Maya glanced down at her arm, surprised. Oh, that. I was moving a patient 2 weeks ago, lost my grip. It's nothing. You're working yourself to death. So are you. Her voice was sharp now. I've seen you, Evan. Watched you keep that diner open when you should have closed, feed people who can't pay, run yourself ragged taking care of your son alone. Don't lecture me about self-sacrifice. She was right, and it stung. They stood there in the converted warehouse, two people who'd been hollowed out by loss and filled back up with purpose that was slowly killing them, recognizing each other in a way that felt too intimate for comfort. How many people do you treat here? Evan finally asked. Maya's shoulders dropped slightly, the fight going out of her. 30, maybe 40 a week. More in winter. We do what we can with what we have. It's not enough. It's never enough. Evan looked around again, seeing it differently now. The supplies were organized but sparse. The equipment was old. The curtains providing privacy were just bed sheets. This was care given with excellence despite poverty, not because of resources. Do the authorities know? No. And they can't. If the city finds out, they'll shut us down. Call it unsafe, unlicensed liability. They'll scatter these people back to the streets, back to dying slowly, so no one can know. She looked at him with something close to pleading. Evan, please. I know this is a lot. I know you probably think I'm crazy or reckless or I think you're incredible, he interrupted, and I think you need help. Maya blinked. What? You're doing the work of 10 people. You're starving yourself. You're working in a condemned building with minimal supplies. But Evan heard his own voice getting stronger as an idea formed. I have a diner that makes food every day. Food that sometimes doesn't sell. Real food, not leftovers you buy to keep up appearances. I have a truck. I have time after closing. Evan, let me help. Why? The question came out almost angry. Why would you risk your business, your son's stability for this? For people you don't even know? Evan thought about Sarah, about the randomness of loss, about how easily he could have been the man on one of these cots, how easily Marcus could have been the child of someone who died because no one thought they were worth saving. Because someone has to, he said, throwing her words back at her. Isn't that what you said? Maya's eyes were suddenly bright with tears she refused to let fall. I can't pay you. Did I ask you to? Evan, this is dangerous. If anyone finds out, then we'll be careful. He looked around the clinic, at the sleeping patients, at the dedicated volunteers who'd clearly been doing this out of love rather than money. You built this alone. Imagine what you could do with help. For a long moment, Maya just stared at him. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. And just like that, Evan Carter's life changed direction. He didn't know it yet. Didn't know that this decision would transform not just the clinic, but himself, his son, and the entire neighborhood. Didn't know that the woman in the wheelchair who'd been eating his leftovers would become the most important person in his world. All he knew was that he'd found something he hadn't even been looking for. A purpose that went beyond survival, beyond just getting through each day. He'd found a reason to hope. Dad, you're humming. Evan looked up from the prep station where he was chopping vegetables for that night's soup special. Marcus sat at the counter doing homework, watching him with curious eyes. Am I? Yeah, you never hum. Marcus tilted his head. Are you happy? The question caught Evan off guard. Was he happy? The diner was still struggling. Money was still impossibly tight. He was sleeping even less now, spending his nights after closing, making meals for Maya's clinic, organizing supply runs, connecting her with vendors he knew who might donate or sell at cost. But yeah, he was humming. I guess I am, buddy. Because of Miss Maya. Evan paused mid-chop. His son was too perceptive. Because I'm helping people who need it. That feels good. Mom used to say helping people was the best thing you could do, better than being rich or famous. Sarah had said that. Usually while dragging him to volunteer at some charity event or fundraiser, her enthusiasm infectious, even when he'd rather have been watching the game. She was right. Marcus nodded solemnly, then returned to his math worksheet. But Evan noticed him smiling. The truth was, the last 2 weeks had been transformative in ways Evan hadn't expected. He'd started bringing food to the clinic every Tuesday and Thursday after closing, real meals, enough to feed the staff and patients. Maya had tried to refuse at first, pride making her protest, but Evan had simply started showing up, and she'd eventually accepted. He'd met the other volunteers, Carol, the former nurse who'd retired and then unretired when she'd found Maya's clinic. James, the ex-boxer who served as security and patient transport. Dr. Singh, an elderly physician who'd lost his license over a billing dispute and now practiced medicine the way it was meant to be practiced, focused on healing rather than profit. They were a ragtag group held together by belief in what they were doing and by Maya's quiet, fierce leadership. Watching her work had been a revelation. The woman who'd sat at his counter accepting charity was a different person here, confident, skilled, commanding respect from everyone around her. We need to talk about sustainability, Evan had said last Thursday, after everyone else had gone home, and it was just the two of them cleaning up. Maya had looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes despite her earlier energy. What about it? You can't keep going like this. You're burning out. I'm fine. You're not. And if you collapse, all of this collapses. Evan had gestured around the clinic. These people need you, which means you need to take care of yourself. Easy to say, harder to do when there's always someone who needs help. Then we expand, find more volunteers, maybe approach some sympathetic donors quietly. Evan. Maya had wheeled to face him directly. I appreciate what you're doing, I really do. But this has to stay small, stay hidden. The moment we try to grow, we risk exposure. So you're just going to work yourself to death in secret? If that's what it takes. Her stubbornness had frustrated him, but he'd also understood it. She'd built this from nothing, carried it alone for so long that asking for help felt like admitting defeat. But he'd seen the way she'd looked at him when he'd shown up with dinner that night. A full meal of roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. The The way her hands had shaken slightly as she'd taken the first real meal she'd probably had in days. The way she'd closed her eyes and just breathed for a moment, as if allowing herself to accept kindness was a luxury she rarely permitted. They were the same, he and Maya, both trying to hold together things that wanted to fall apart, both convinced they had to do it alone, both wrong. The bell above the diner door chimed, interrupting Evan's thoughts. He looked up, expecting the usual afternoon regulars. Instead, he saw trouble. Two men in suits, not the cheap kind worn by city inspectors or the expensive kind worn by lawyers. Something in between, something that screamed authority without official badges. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Evan kept his voice neutral, but every protective instinct he had went on alert. The older of the two, gray hair, sharp eyes, the bearing of someone used to being obeyed, looked around the diner with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. "Evan Carter?" "That's right." "I'm Richard Morrison. This is my associate, Thomas Burke. We represent Consolidated Healthcare Group." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'd like to talk to you about someone we believe you know. Maya Reed." Evan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. "What about her?" "We understand you've been in contact with Dr. Reed recently. Regular contact." Dr. Reed, not Maya. Not the woman in the wheelchair who asked for leftovers. They knew who she'd been. "I know Maya, yes. She's a customer." Evan kept his face carefully blank. "Is there a problem?" Morrison and Burke exchanged glances. Then Morrison pulled out a business card, slid it across the counter. "Dr. Reed used to be one of the finest trauma surgeons in the state. Her accident was unfortunate, but Consolidated Healthcare has been trying to locate her for quite some time. We have opportunities that might interest her. Consulting work, research positions, ways she could still contribute to medicine despite her physical limitations." Every word sounded reasonable, professional, and set off every alarm bell Evan had. "Why are you talking to me about this instead of her directly?" "Because Dr. Reed has made herself rather difficult to find. No permanent address on file, no phone number. She's collecting disability, but beyond that?" Morrison shrugged. "It's as if she doesn't want to be found. Maybe she doesn't. Or maybe she doesn't know what opportunities are waiting for her." Morrison's smile turned harder. "Mr. Carter, we're prepared to offer Dr. Reed a very generous contract, life-changing money, but we need to talk to her first. If you could arrange an introduction..." "No." The word came out flat, final. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Mr. Carter, I don't think you understand. I understand fine. Maya wants privacy. I'm not going to violate that. If you want to talk to her, find her yourself. We could make it worth your while." "I said no." The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Burke, who hadn't spoken yet, took a step forward. Up close, Evan could see he was younger, harder, the kind of man who'd learned to intimidate with presence alone. "Mr. Carter," Burke said quietly, "Consolidated Healthcare is a major corporation. We have resources, connections. It would be unfortunate if those resources were turned toward investigating, say, health code violations, tax discrepancies, the kind of things that could close a small business like this." Marcus had gone very still in his booth, his homework forgotten. Evan felt rage bubble up in his chest, hot, protective, dangerous. "Get out of my diner." Morrison held up a placating hand. "There's no need for hostility. We're simply threatening me and my business if I don't help you track down someone who clearly doesn't want to be found. Yeah, I got that. Now get out before I call the police." For a moment, Evan thought they might push harder. But then Morrison smiled again, that cold corporate smile that promised this wasn't over, and nodded. "Of course. We apologize for any misunderstanding." He tapped the business card on the counter. "If you change your mind, Mr. Carter, give us a call. The offer for Dr. Reed remains open, and we'd be happy to discuss ways we might support your establishment as well." They left. Evan stood there, hands gripping the counter hard enough to hurt, watching through the window as they climbed into a black sedan that screamed money and power. "Dad?" Marcus's voice was small. "Are we in trouble?" Evan turned to his son, forced his hands to relax, put on a smile he didn't feel. "Nobody, just some people who don't understand that no means no. But as Marcus returned to his homework and Evan tried to focus on prep work, his mind raced. Consolidated Healthcare was looking for Maya. Not just looking, hunting. With the kind of resources that could destroy his diner as a side thought if he got in their way. Which meant Maya was in danger. The clinic was in danger. And Evan had just painted a target on both their backs by refusing to cooperate. He looked at Morrison's business card still sitting on the counter. Then he picked it up, walked to the trash can, and dropped it in. Some choices were simple, even when they were dangerous. Maya needed to know about this. Tonight. And then they would figure out what the hell they were going to do about Consolidated Healthcare and their very generous offers that felt like threats wrapped in expensive paper. Because Evan had learned one thing in the years since Sarah's death. The people who smiled the widest while promising help were often the ones you needed to fear most. The warehouse felt different that night. Colder, maybe, or just weighted with the knowledge that someone was actively searching for what Maya had built in the shadows. Evan arrived later than usual, carrying containers of beef stew and cornbread, his mind still churning over Morrison's smile and Burke's quiet threat. Maya was with a patient when he entered, a teenage girl with a nasty gash on her forearm that looked like it had come from broken glass. She worked with steady hands, cleaning the wound, numbing it, preparing to suture. The girl flinched but didn't cry out. "You're doing great, Jasmine," Maya said softly. "Just a few more minutes and you'll be all set. Carol's going to give you antibiotics and instructions for keeping this clean, okay?" "Okay, Dr. Maya." Evan set the food containers on the makeshift counter they'd fashioned from old cafeteria tables and watched Maya work. Her hands moved with precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice, muscle memory that paralysis couldn't erase. She'd been a surgeon, a trauma surgeon. He still couldn't quite reconcile that with the woman who'd come to his diner asking for leftovers with such careful humility. Carol noticed him first. "Evan, you're late. We were starting to worry." "Sorry. Had something I needed to take care of." He gestured to the food. "Nothing fancy tonight, just stew." "Nothing fancy," he says, like he didn't make enough to feed 20 people. Carol smiled warmly. "You're a godsend. You know that?" Evan didn't feel like a godsend. He felt like a man who'd stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than he'd realized, and who was now trying to figure out how to protect it without getting everyone hurt. Maya finished the sutures with practiced efficiency, bandaged the girl's arm, and gave her instructions that Jasmine repeated back dutifully. Only when the teenager had been handed off to Carol for follow-up care did Maya wheel over to Evan. "You look worried," she said without preamble. "What happened? Can we talk? Privately?" Something flickered across her face, concern maybe, or recognition that the tentative peace they'd found was about to be disturbed. She nodded and led him to the far corner of the warehouse, behind a set of curtains that separated the treatment area from a small office space she'd carved out. It held a desk, a filing cabinet, and a cot that Evan suspected she slept on more often than she should. "What's wrong?" Maya asked once they were alone. Evan told her about Morrison and Burke, about Consolidated Healthcare, about the veiled threats and the business card now sitting at the bottom of his trash can. With each word, he watched Maya's face go from concern to pale to something harder, a kind of resigned anger that told him this wasn't the first time she'd dealt with these people. "Consolidated," she said when he finished. The word came out bitter. "Of course it's them. You know them." "I used to work for them." "Well, technically I worked for County General, but County is owned by Consolidated. They own half the hospitals in the state." Maya's hands gripped her wheelchair's armrests. "After my accident, they were very concerned, very sympathetic, offered me consulting positions, research roles, administrative work, all of it designed to keep me connected to the company." "That doesn't sound so bad." "It wasn't about helping me, Evan. It was about control." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "I'd seen things while I worked there. Cost-cutting measures that put patients at risk, denied care because of insurance status, administrators pushing doctors to discharge people who still needed treatment because it looked better on quarterly reports. I'd filed complaints, made noise. They tolerated it when I was bringing in revenue as a surgeon, but after the accident, they wanted you quiet. They wanted me grateful, Dependent. Every offer came with NDAs and non-compete clauses that would have prevented me from ever speaking publicly about what I'd witnessed. And when I refused, when I said I'd rather live on disability than sell my silence, they made it very clear that my medical license could be reviewed, that questions could be raised about my competency, that a doctor in a wheelchair might not be fit to practice medicine anymore. The cruelty of it hit Evan like a physical blow. So you disappeared. So I disappeared, changed my address, disconnected my phone, made myself as invisible as possible. Maya's laugh held no humor. I thought I'd been careful enough. I should have known they'd eventually track me down. They don't know about the clinic. They can't. If they did, we'd already have city inspectors and police shutting us down. No, they just know I'm in the area somewhere, and they know you've been in contact with me. She looked at him with something close to regret. Evan, I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. I dragged myself into it. Followed you, remember? You were trying to help. I'm still trying to help. Question is, what do we do now? Maya was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with exhaustion. You distance yourself from me. Tell Morrison I came in once or twice and you haven't seen me since. Give them nothing. Protect your diner and your son. Absolutely not. Evan, you think I'm going to abandon you because some corporate thug showed up making threats? You think that little of me? I think you're a father with a child to protect, and I think Consolidated Healthcare has more money and power than both of us combined. They can destroy your business. They can make your life hell, all because I was selfish enough to accept your help. Evan moved closer, crouching down so he was eye level with her. Listen to me. You are not selfish. You're the most selfless person I've met. You spend every penny saving people who have nothing. You work yourself to exhaustion. You asked for leftovers because you were literally starving yourself to keep this place running. Don't you dare call that selfish. Tears welled in Maya's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. You don't understand what you're risking. Then help me understand. Talk to me. Tell me what Consolidated really wants. Maya took a shaky breath, composing herself with visible effort. When I was still at County General, I was part of a surgical team that treated a patient, a whistleblower who'd been beaten badly enough to need emergency surgery. He survived, but the story he told me while recovering was about Consolidated's illegal billing practices. Upcoding, charging for procedures that were never performed, millions of dollars in Medicare fraud. Did you report it? I tried. Filed a report with the hospital administration. That's when things got ugly. The patient mysteriously discharged himself against medical advice and disappeared. My report was lost, and I started getting pressure from people way above my pay grade to forget what I'd heard. Maya's hands trembled slightly. 2 weeks later, I was driving home from a 30-hour shift. A truck ran a red light, hit me broadside. Drunk driver, they said. He was convicted, did 6 months. The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and cold. You think it wasn't an accident, Evan said quietly. I think the drunk driver had his legal fees paid by someone. I think he got out of jail and immediately left the state with enough money to start over. And I think the timing was awfully convenient. She met his eyes. I can't prove any of it. But yes, I think Consolidated wanted me silenced. And when threats didn't work, they tried something more permanent. And now they found you again. And now they found me again. Which means they're worried I still have that information. That I might still talk. Maya's voice hardened. They're right to worry. I kept copies of everything, documentation, the whistleblower's statement, my own notes, all of it hidden where they can't find it. Evan's mind raced. This was so much worse than he'd imagined. Not just corporate intimidation, but potential conspiracy, fraud, maybe even attempted murder. Maya, if what you're saying is true, you need to go to the police, the FBI, someone. With what evidence? A drunk driving conviction from 3 years ago? Corporate memos that could be explained away as legitimate business practices? My word against a multi-billion-dollar corporation? She shook her head. I'd be laughed out of every office I walked into. Or worse, I'd make enough noise that Consolidated would actually come after me again, and this time they'd make sure it stuck. So what? You just hide forever? Keep running this clinic in secret, hoping they never find it? What else can I do, Evan? I'm one person, in a wheelchair, living on disability. Against them, I'm nothing. The defeat in her voice broke something in Evan. This was a woman who'd built a clinic from nothing, who saved lives every week with minimal resources, who'd survived an accident that would have destroyed most people and come out fighting. She wasn't nothing, she was extraordinary, and she needed to see that. You're not nothing, he said firmly, and you're not alone anymore. Let me help you figure this out. How? You going to take on Consolidated Healthcare single-handedly? If I have to, but I'm thinking we start smaller, document everything, build a case that's airtight, find that whistleblower if he's still alive, gather enough evidence that when we do go public, they can't bury it. Maya stared at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. That could take months, years, and in the meantime, Morrison and Burke are out there looking for me. So we're careful. We keep the clinic hidden. We don't give them anything to find. They threatened your diner, Evan, your livelihood. If you keep helping me, then they follow through on their threats and I deal with it. I'm not afraid of them. You should be. Probably, but I'm not. Evan straightened up, his decision made. Look, I've spent the last 3 years just trying to survive. Keep the diner open, raise Marcus, get through each day. And yeah, I've managed, but that's all it's been. Managing. Since Sarah died, I've been existing, not living. This clinic, helping you, it's the first time in 3 years I've felt like I'm doing something that matters. Feeding people matters. Raising your son matters. You're right. And I'll keep doing both, but I can do this too. We can do this together. He held her gaze. Unless you really want me to walk away. If you do, just say so and I will. But it'll be because you told me to, not because some corporate suits tried to scare me off. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Evan could see Maya wrestling with herself, pride fighting with need, fear battling hope. Finally, she exhaled slowly. You're stubborn, you know that? I've been told. And reckless. Also been told that. And apparently incapable of recognizing when you're in over your head. That one's new, but I'll accept it. Maya's lips quirked despite herself. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Okay? Okay. Okay, we do this together, but carefully. And if things get too dangerous, if Morrison and his people start putting real pressure on your diner or threatening Marcus, you walk away. No arguments. Deal? Evan extended his hand. Deal. She took it, her grip surprisingly strong. Her hand was warm in his, calloused from years of wheeling herself around. And when their eyes met, something passed between them that had nothing to do with clinics or corporations. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The sense that two people who'd been alone for too long had found something in each other worth fighting for. The moment broke when Carol's voice called out from the main treatment area. Maya, we've got a patient coming in. Possible overdose. Maya's professional mask snapped back into place instantly. Coming? She looked at Evan. We'll talk more later. For now you've got patients to save. I'll hang around, help where I can. Thank you. She wheeled out quickly, leaving Evan standing in the small office space, his hand still warm from her touch. Through the curtain, he could hear her giving rapid-fire instructions to Carol and James, her voice calm but urgent. A life might hang in the balance, and she was ready. Evan followed her out, pushed up his sleeves, and got to work. If this was his life now, split between running a struggling diner and supporting an underground clinic while corporate predators circled, then he'd face it the only way he knew how. Head on, without apology, and with the stubborn determination that had kept him standing through every blow life had thrown at him. The patient was a young man, early 20s, unconscious and barely breathing. James had carried him in, found him in an alley 2 blocks away. Maya worked with swift precision, checking vitals, administering Narcan, monitoring for response. Dr. Singh appeared from somewhere in the back, and together they stabilized the patient, brought him back from the edge. It took an hour. When it was done, when the young man was breathing on his own and conscious enough to mumble his thanks, Maya sat back in her wheelchair and closed her eyes briefly. The Third overdose this month, Carol said quietly. It's getting worse out there. I know. Maya's voice was heavy. We need more Narcan, more beds, more everything. Evan thought about Morrison's offer. Life-changing money, the suit had said. Resources that could transform this operation from a desperate improvisation into something sustainable. All Maya had to do was sell her silence about Consolidated's crimes. Looking at her now, exhausted, determined, surrounded by people she'd saved with nothing but skill and will, Evan knew she'd never take that deal. The money would be poison. The resources would come with chains. Better to build something real from nothing than to accept a fortune built on lies. I'll reach out to some suppliers I know, Evan said. See if anyone has medical supplies they can donate or sell cheap. No questions asked. Maya opened her eyes, looked at him with such naked gratitude it hurt. You sure? I'm sure. The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. More patients came in, a woman with a respiratory infection, an elderly man with diabetes complications, a teenager with a sprained ankle. Maya and her team treated them all with the same level of care and attention, never asking for payment, never turning anyone away. Evan helped where he could, serving the stew he'd brought, cleaning instruments, moving supplies, learning the rhythm of this strange, hidden place where medicine was practiced the way it was meant to be, focused on healing, not profit. It was nearly 2 a.m. when things finally quieted down. Carol and Dr. Singh had gone home. James was dozing in a chair near the entrance, keeping watch. The patients were sleeping, their breathing steady, in the darkness. Maya wheeled over to where Evan was washing dishes in the makeshift kitchen area they'd set up. You should go home, she said softly. Get some sleep. Marcus will wonder where you are. But he's used to me working late, and Mrs. Chen doesn't mind. Evan dried his hands, turned to face her. You should sleep too. You look exhausted. I'll rest when I'm dead. That's what I'm afraid of. She smiled tiredly. Worrier. Guilty. They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, the warehouse quiet around them except for the soft sounds of sleeping patients and James's snoring. Evan, Maya said finally, what you did tonight, standing up to Morrison, refusing to give them information even though it put you at risk. Why? He thought about it, searching for the right words. 3 years ago, I lost the most important person in my world. One random moment, one drunk driver, same as you. And Sarah was gone. And I learned something from that. Life is fragile. The people we love can disappear in a heartbeat. So when I find someone worth protecting, someone doing something that actually matters, I don't hesitate. I don't calculate risks. I just act. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. You matter, Maya. What you're doing here matters. These people matter. And if I can help protect that even a little, then that's what I'm going to do. Maya's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you gave up everything to help people who have nothing. I know you're braver than anyone I've ever met. I know you eat my leftovers because you'd rather starve than take a single dollar away from this clinic. He paused. I know that when I'm here, helping you, I feel like I'm finally doing something Sarah would be proud of. I think she'd be proud of you regardless, Maya said softly. You're raising a good kid, running an honest business, surviving despite everything. That's not nothing, Evan. Maybe, but it's better with you in it. The words hung between them, meaning more than Evan had intended. He saw Maya process them, saw her expression shift from surprise to something softer, more vulnerable. Evan, I should go. He stood quickly, suddenly nervous. It's late. You need rest. I need rest. We can talk more tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday, not your usual night. Then I'll come anyway, if that's okay. Maya nodded slowly. It's okay. More than okay. Evan gathered his empty containers, said goodbye to a drowsy James, and headed out into the cold night air. His truck was where he'd left it, covered in a fine mist from the rain that had started and stopped while he was inside. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, hands on the wheel, mind racing. Everything had changed tonight. What had started as a simple act of concern following a woman he'd worried was in danger had evolved into something complex and dangerous and important. Consolidated Healthcare was out there, searching. Morrison and Burke would be back. The threats would escalate, and Evan had just committed himself to standing in their way. But as he started the engine and pulled away from the warehouse, watching it disappear in his rearview mirror, Evan felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Purpose. Real, undeniable purpose. Sarah would have understood. She'd always been the first to help, the quickest to step in when someone needed defending. She'd driven him crazy with it sometimes, bringing home stray people the way other people brought home stray cats, convinced that everyone deserved a second chance. She'd have loved Maya, would have recognized the strength wrapped in apparent vulnerability, would have probably been at the clinic every night, organizing things, recruiting volunteers, making it all work through sheer force of personality. "I miss you," Evan said to the empty truck, "but I think I'm finally figuring out how to live without you, how to be the person you thought I could be." The streets of South Harbor were empty at this hour, the broken streetlights casting everything in shadow. Evan drove carefully, watchful for the dangers that came out after midnight in neighborhoods like this. But his mind was already moving ahead, planning. He needed to talk to his suppliers, see who might help with medical supplies. He needed to research consolidated healthcare, understand what he was really up against. He needed to be more careful, more strategic about how he helped Maya so he didn't lead Morrison right to her door. And he needed to figure out what to do about the way his heart had kicked when Maya had looked at him with tears in her eyes, when she'd thanked him for standing beside her. It was too soon. Sarah had only been gone 3 years. Marcus needed stability, not his father developing feelings for someone new, and Maya had enough problems without adding complicated emotions to the mix. But feelings didn't consult calendars or care about logic. They just existed, growing in the spaces between shared purpose and late-night conversations, in the quiet moments when two damaged people recognized each other's scars. Evan pulled up to his building, parked the truck, and climbed the stairs to his apartment. Mrs. Chen had left a note saying Marcus had gone to bed at 9 and been perfect, as always. Evan peeked into his son's room, saw him sleeping peacefully, one arm flung over his head the way Sarah used to sleep. "Your dad's getting in deep, buddy," Evan whispered. "Hope I'm doing the right thing." Marcus slept on, innocent and trusting, believing his father would keep him safe, believing the world was basically good. Evan would do everything in his power to make sure that belief stayed intact, even if it meant going to war with a corporation that had the money and power to destroy him, even if it meant risking everything he'd built in the 3 years since Sarah's death, even if it meant falling for a woman in a wheelchair who saved lives in a condemned warehouse and called it a Tuesday. Some things were worth the risk. Maya Reed was one of them. The health inspector arrived on a Thursday morning, clipboard in hand, and an expression that told Evan this wasn't a routine visit. He watched through the diner's front window as the woman, mid-40s, severe bun, city badge gleaming on her lapel, consulted something on her phone before pushing through the door. "Mr. Carter, I'm Inspector Williams with the Department of Health. We've received a complaint about this establishment, and I'm here to conduct a full inspection." Evan's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. "A complaint? What kind of complaint?" "Anonymous tip regarding food storage temperatures, cross-contamination, and potential rodent activity." She said it matter-of-factly, as if she hadn't just listed violations that could shut him down. "I'll need access to your kitchen, storage areas, and all relevant documentation." Marcus was at school. The lunch rush wouldn't start for another hour. The diner was empty except for old Mr. Jacobson nursing his coffee in the corner booth, watching the proceedings with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Of course," Evan said, already knowing what this was. Morrison hadn't wasted time. 3 days since Evan had refused to cooperate, and here came the pressure. "Everything's in order, but you're welcome to look." Inspector Williams spent 2 hours going through every inch of the diner with the kind of thoroughness that spoke of someone with explicit instructions to find something wrong. She checked temperatures, examined surfaces, scrutinized expiration dates, inspected the storage areas with a flashlight, and what looked like genuine disappointment when she found everything clean. "Your refrigeration is 0.5 degrees outside the recommended range," she said finally, making a note. "And there's a small crack in the grout near the dishwashing station that could potentially harbor bacteria." "I can fix both of those today," Evan said evenly. "You'll have 72 hours to remedy the issues and provide photographic evidence of completion." Failure to comply will result in a follow-up inspection and potential citations. She handed him a form. Have a good day, Mr. Carter. She left, and Evan stood there holding a violation notice for problems so minor they were barely problems at all. In any other context, Inspector Williams would have given him a verbal warning and moved on. But this wasn't any other context. This was Consolidated Healthcare flexing its muscles, showing him what they could do. Mr. Jacobson cleared his throat. Trouble? Nothing I can't handle, Evan lied. That woman was looking for reasons to shut you down. Didn't find them, though. Place is cleaner than most hospitals I've been in. The old man sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You make some enemies, son? Something like that. Well, don't let the bastards grind you down. This neighborhood needs this place. Needs you. Mr. Jacobson stood, left $3 on the table for a coffee that cost $1.50. You need anything? You let me know. I may be old, but I still know people. After he left, Evan pulled out his phone and called Maya. She answered on the third ring, slightly breathless. Evan, everything okay? They came after the diner, health inspector, found violations that barely qualify as violations. He told her about Williams, about the 72-hour deadline, about the clear message being sent. Maya was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tight with guilt. I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Don't apologize. This is on them, not you. But if you hadn't helped me, then they wouldn't have a reason to come after me, sure. But I'd also still be just going through the motions, running a diner and raising my kid and pretending that was enough. Evan leaned against the counter, watching pedestrians pass by the window. I can fix the violations. It'll cost me, but I can do it. What worries me is what comes next. They'll escalate. Tax audits, maybe? Or they'll find other ways to make your life difficult. Maya's frustration was audible. Evan, you still have time to step back. Tell Morrison you thought about it and you're willing to arrange a meeting with me. They'll back off. And then what? You meet with them, they make their offers, and suddenly you're locked into NDAs and contracts that keep you quiet about everything you know? At least you'd be safe. The diner would be safe. I don't want safe if it means betraying you. He heard her breath catch, heard the unspoken emotion in the silence that followed. Finally, she said quietly, You barely know me, Evan. Why are you willing to risk so much? It was the second time she'd asked a version of that question, and Evan still didn't have an answer that made complete sense. How did you explain to someone that they'd reminded you what it felt like to care about something beyond mere survival? That watching them save lives with nothing but skill and determination had woken up a part of you that had been sleeping since your wife died? Because what you're doing matters, he said instead, and because I think you're the strongest person I've ever met, and you deserve someone standing beside you for once, instead of watching you carry everything alone. Evan, I've got to go. Lunch rush is starting. But Maya, we're going to be okay. Both of us. I promise. He hung up before she could argue, before the emotion in her voice could undo his resolve. Then he got to work fixing the violations, calling a repair company about the refrigeration, regrouting the tile himself with supplies from the hardware store down the block. The lunch crowd was smaller than usual. Word traveled fast in neighborhoods like South Harbor, and a health inspector's visit was the kind of thing that made people nervous. Evan served the customers who did come with his usual care, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating costs and strategies and trying to figure out how to fight an enemy with unlimited resources. That evening, after closing, he drove to the warehouse with containers of chicken and rice, his truck's newly fixed brakes squeaking slightly despite the mechanic's promises. The clinic was busy, a Thursday night tradition, Maya had explained, because the free clinic across town closed on Thursdays, and people who couldn't wait until Friday ended up at her door. He found her in the middle of treating a woman who'd clearly been beaten, her face a mess of bruises and split skin. Maya worked with gentle efficiency, cleaning wounds, checking for fractures, speaking in a low voice that managed to be both professional and deeply compassionate. "Does he know where you are?" Maya asked the woman. "No, I took the kids and ran. Been staying at a shelter, but they're full up tonight. Carol, get me the domestic violence resource list and see if Sarah's place has any beds." Maya finished bandaging a particularly nasty cut above the woman's eye. "You did the right thing leaving. That took courage. Doesn't feel courageous. Feels like I'm falling apart. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what you need to do despite the fear. Maya's voice was firm. You're going to get through this. We're going to help you. Evan watched from the doorway, struck again by the contradiction of this woman. The world saw someone diminished by disability, someone to be pitied or helped. But here, in this converted warehouse, Maya Reed was power personified. She commanded respect, saved lives, offered hope to people who'd run out of places to turn. When the patient had been settled with resources and a safe place to stay for the night, Maya wheeled over to where Evan was unpacking food. You fixed the violations already? Grout's drying. Repairman's coming tomorrow morning for the fridge. I'll have photos by end of day. That fast? When you're motivated, you move quickly. He looked at her directly. They're not going to scare me off, Maya. The sooner Morrison figures that out, the better. Or the sooner they escalate to something worse. Then we deal with it. Together. That word again. Together. It hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond the clinic and consolidated and the various battles they were fighting. Maya held his gaze, and Evan saw something shift in her expression. A wall coming down, maybe, or a decision being made. I need to show you something, she said quietly. Can you stay after everyone else leaves? Of course. The next 3 hours passed in the familiar rhythm of the clinic. Patients came and went. Injuries were treated. Illnesses were diagnosed. Dr. Singh arrived and consulted on a complicated case involving an elderly man's heart condition. James broke up a potential fight between two patients arguing over something trivial. Carol distributed medications with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. And through it all, Maya was the calm center, the steady presence that held everything together. It was past midnight when the last patient left and Carol and Dr. Singh said their goodbyes. James did a final security check, then headed out with a wave. Suddenly, it was just Evan and Maya in the quiet warehouse, the overhead lights humming softly. Come with me, Maya said, wheeling toward the back of the space. She led him past the treatment area, past the small office, to a section of the warehouse Evan hadn't explored before. There was a door here, reinforced and locked with a deadbolt that looked new. Maya pulled out a key, unlocked it, and gestured for him to follow. Inside was a storage room that had been converted into something else entirely. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A desk held a laptop and printer. But what caught Evan's attention was the opposite wall, covered in papers, photographs, and documents connected by red string like something out of a detective movie. This is everything I have on consolidated healthcare, Maya said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 3 years of investigation, documents I copied before I left County General, public records I've gathered since, testimony from the whistleblower before he disappeared. Evan moved closer, scanning the wall. Financial reports showing discrepancies. Internal memos discussing billing practices. Patient charts with charges for procedures that were never performed. Emails between administrators discussing how to maximize revenue regardless of patient outcomes. It was damning, comprehensive, and clearly the work of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. This is incredible, he breathed. Maya, this is enough to what? Take to the authorities? I tried that. Filed reports with the state medical board. They investigated and found insufficient evidence of wrongdoing. Consolidated has friends in high places, regulators who used to work for them, politicians they've donated to. My evidence gets buried under layers of bureaucracy, and suddenly I'm the problem, a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. So you kept investigating. I kept investigating, kept gathering evidence, kept hoping that eventually I'd find something so big, so undeniable, that even Consolidated couldn't bury it. She wheeled closer to the wall, touched one of the documents gently. This is why they want to find me, Evan. Not because they care about my well-being, because they know I have this. And they know if it ever sees the light of day in the right form, they're finished. Evan studied the wall more carefully, his mind racing. The whistleblower. You said he disappeared. What happened? His name was Robert Chen. He worked in billing at County General, noticed the discrepancies, tried to report them internally. When that didn't work, he came to me because he'd heard I wasn't afraid to make noise. I protected him, got his statement, encouraged him to go to the authorities. Then he was beaten so badly he needed surgery, my surgery. After he recovered, he was supposed to testify, but he vanished. No forwarding address, phone disconnected, like he never existed. You think Consolidated paid him off? I think Consolidated gave him a choice: take the money and disappear, or end up in a grave. Robert had a family, a wife and 2 kids. I don't blame him for choosing survival. Maya's voice was bitter. But without him, my evidence is just documents. Paper trails that Consolidated can explain away as accounting errors or misunderstandings. What about other employees? Someone else who might be willing to talk? I've tried. Reached out to people I used to work with. Most won't talk to me. The ones who do say the same thing. They need their jobs. They have families to support. Going up against Consolidated means unemployment and blacklisting. They're sorry, but they can't help. Evan looked at the wall, at 3 years of work and determination and hope, and felt anger kindle in his chest. This was what real corruption looked like. Not comic book villains, but spreadsheets and billing codes, and people too scared to speak up because speaking up meant losing everything. There has to be a way, he said. Some angle we're missing. If there is, I haven't found it, and believe me, I've looked. Maya's exhaustion was visible now, the weight of carrying this alone for so long evident in every line of her face. Sometimes I think about just letting it go, accepting that Consolidated won, focusing on the clinic and the people I can actually help instead of chasing justice I'll never get. But you don't let it go. No, because every time I treat someone at this clinic who should have been treated at a real hospital but couldn't afford it, I think about Consolidated's executives making millions while people suffer, and I can't let it go. Even if it's destroying me, even if it's hopeless. Evan moved to stand beside her, looking at the wall of evidence. It's not hopeless. We just need a different approach. We? You showed me this for a reason. You could have kept it hidden, told me nothing, protected me from knowing too much. But you didn't. So I'm guessing part of you was hoping I'd have an idea you haven't thought of. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed softly, without humor. I showed you because I'm tired of carrying this alone. Because having someone else know, even if nothing changes, makes it feel less impossible. And because... She stopped, looked up at him. Because I trust you, Evan. Which is terrifying, given I barely know you, but there it is. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Evan felt something in his chest tighten, that same feeling he'd had watching her work, listening to her talk about justice and sacrifice, and the cost of doing what was right. I'm glad you trust me, he said quietly, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you make this right. Even if it means Morrison comes after you harder, even if they escalate beyond health inspections. Even then, Maya reached out, took his hand. Her grip was warm, solid, real. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Probably both. She smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that transformed her whole face. Yeah, probably. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, surrounded by evidence of corporate malfeasance and the quiet hum of the warehouse. Then Maya released his hand and turned back to the wall. There might be one angle we haven't fully explored, she said slowly. Investigative journalism. If we could get a reporter interested, someone with the resources to dig deeper and the platform to make noise that can't be ignored, Consolidated would sue them into oblivion. Maybe, but some publications have legal teams that can handle that. And if the story's big enough, compelling enough, the public pressure might force actual investigations by people who can't be bought off. Evan considered it. Do you know any journalists? No, but I know how to research, how to find the right people. Maya pulled out her phone, started making notes. We'd need to be strategic about this. Approach someone with a track record of taking on powerful institutions. Someone who won't back down when Consolidated's lawyers come knocking. And in the meantime, we keep our heads down. Don't give Morrison any reason to look closer at what we're doing here. Which means you need to be careful at the diner. If they send another inspector, I'll handle it. Focus on finding the right journalist. I'll focus on keeping us both safe. Maya looked at him with such naked gratitude, it made his heart ache. Thank you, Evan, for all of this. For believing me. For standing with me. Always, he said, and meant it. The words settled between them with the weight of a promise. Always. Not just for this fight against Consolidated, but for whatever came after. For the clinic and the patients and the quiet war they were waging against a system that valued profit over people. They spent another hour going through Maya's evidence, Evan asking questions, Maya explaining the nuances of medical billing fraud and corporate corruption. His head spun with the complexity of it, but one thing was clear. What Consolidated had done wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. And if they could prove it, if they could find the right platform and the right voice, they could maybe actually win. It was nearly 3 a.m. when Evan finally left, exhausted but energized in a way he hadn't felt in years. He drove home through empty streets, his mind already working on the logistics of what came next. Protecting the diner, supporting Maya's search for a journalist, keeping Marcus safe and unaware of the larger forces at play. The next day brought another challenge, a letter from the IRS informing him that his tax returns for the past 3 years had been flagged for audit. Random selection, the letter said, though Evan knew there was nothing random about it. He called his accountant, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who'd been doing his taxes since he opened the diner. An audit? Patricia's voice crackled with indignation. Evan, your returns are boring. You barely make enough to owe significant taxes. This doesn't make sense. It makes sense if someone with money and connections wants to make my life difficult. You in some kind of trouble? The complicated kind. Patricia sighed. Well, your books are clean. I made sure of that. An audit will be inconvenient and stressful, but they won't find anything wrong. Just be prepared for it to take time and energy you don't have. Time and energy he didn't have. That was the point, of course. Death by 1,000 cuts. Keep him busy with inspections and audits and bureaucratic nightmares until he was too exhausted to help Maya, too stressed to resist. But Consolidated had miscalculated. They'd assumed Evan was like most people, willing to fold when pressure was applied, eager to return to the safety of invisibility. They didn't understand that he'd already lost the most important thing in his life when Sarah died. Everything since had been borrowed time, and he wasn't afraid of losing things that had never really belonged to him in the first place. The diner could fail. The audit could bankrupt him. Morrison could escalate until Evan lost everything. But he wouldn't lose his integrity, wouldn't abandon someone who'd reminded him what it meant to fight for something larger than himself. That evening, Marcus noticed his distraction over dinner. Dad, are you okay? You seem worried. Evan looked at his son, 7 years old and already too perceptive, too aware of adult problems. Just work stuff, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about. Is it about Miss Maya? The question surprised him. Why would you think that? Marcus shrugged, pushing peas around his plate. Because you smile different when you talk about her. Like you used to smile with Mom. The observation hit Evan like a physical blow. He thought he was being subtle, keeping his growing feelings for Maya separate from his role as a father. But kids noticed everything, especially kids who'd already learned that adults weren't invincible. Miss Maya's a friend who needs help, Evan said carefully. And yeah, I guess helping her makes me happy. Is that okay with you? Marcus considered this seriously. Mom would want you to be happy. She told me that before the accident. Said if anything ever happened to her, you should find someone who makes you smile again. Evan's throat tightened. Sarah had said something similar to him too, during one of those morbid conversations couples sometimes have about mortality and worst-case scenarios. He'd laughed it off then, unable to imagine a world without her in it. Now here he was, in that impossible world, and his 7-year-old son was giving him permission to move forward. I'm not looking for someone to replace your mom, Evan said quietly. No one could ever do that. I know. But maybe someone who makes things feel less sad, someone who helps you the way you help them. Out of the mouths of children. Evan reached across the table, ruffled Marcus's hair. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just don't always listen. They finished dinner with easier conversation, but Marcus's words stayed with Evan through the evening cleanup and bedtime routine. Someone who makes things feel less sad. Someone who helps you the way you help them. That was Maya, wasn't it? In the weeks since he'd followed her to the warehouse, since he'd discovered the truth of who she was and what she'd built, something had shifted in Evan's internal landscape. The grief that had been his constant companion since Sarah's death was still there, would probably always be there. But it had company now, hope, purpose, the possibility that life could be more than just getting through each day. He thought about calling Maya, telling her about the audit, but decided against it. She had enough to worry about without adding his problems to her list. Instead, he pulled out his laptop and started researching investigative journalists, looking for someone with a track record of exposing corporate corruption. The list was shorter than he'd hoped. Most journalists who took on powerful institutions worked for major publications that had been systematically defunded and diminished over the years. The ones who remained were overworked, underpaid, and drowning in tips from people who believed they'd uncovered the story of the century. But there were a few names that stood out. Reporters who'd broken major stories despite legal threats and corporate pressure. People who seemed to genuinely care about accountability and justice. Evan made notes, cross-referenced their recent work, tried to figure out which one might be most likely to take Maya's evidence seriously. It was tedious work, but it felt productive, like he was actually doing something instead of just reacting to Morrison's attacks. Around midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Can't sleep. Keep thinking about our conversation. Thank you for listening, for believing me." Evan typed back, "Can't sleep either. Tax audit arrived today. They're really pulling out all the stops. I'm so sorry." "Don't be. I knew what I was signing up for. We'll get through this." "Together?" "Together." He stared at that word on his screen, at the question mark Maya had added that turned it into something more than a statement of alliance. She was asking for reassurance, for confirmation that he meant what he said. "Always," he typed, echoing what he'd told her earlier. Then before he could second-guess himself, he added, "You're not alone anymore, Maya. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The three dots indicating she was typing appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, a message came through. "You're either going to save my life or ruin it. I can't decide which." "Why not both?" "That's what I'm afraid of." Evan smiled at his phone, at the way Maya could be vulnerable and guarded at the same time, reaching out while preparing to pull back. He understood that impulse. After Sarah, he'd spent 3 years building walls, convinced that letting anyone close meant risking the kind of pain that had nearly destroyed him. But walls didn't keep you safe. They just kept you isolated. "Get some sleep," he texted. "Big day tomorrow. You're going to save more lives, and I'm going to serve more questionable coffee. The world needs us at our best." "Questionable coffee? Your coffee is excellent." "See, you're delirious from exhaustion. Definitely need sleep." "Good night, Evan." "Good night, Maya." He set down his phone and sat in the quiet of his apartment, listening to the familiar sounds of the building settling, the distant traffic, the world continuing its relentless march forward. Somewhere in this city, Maya was lying awake in her own space, probably still thinking about Consolidated and Evidence and whether they stood any chance of winning. Somewhere else, Morrison and Burke were probably planning their next move, confident that enough pressure would eventually break Evan's resolve. And here, in this small apartment above a struggling diner, a widowed father sat contemplating how his life had changed direction in a matter of weeks. How concern for a stranger had evolved into commitment to a cause. How helping someone else had somehow started healing parts of himself he'd thought were permanently broken. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But as Evan finally turned off the lights and headed to bed, one thought remained clear. Whatever happened next, whatever Morrison threw at them, whatever battles they had to fight, he wouldn't face them alone. And neither would Maya. That was worth every risk. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source 3 weeks later. Evan was closing up the diner on a Tuesday evening when a woman in her 60s walked in, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime navigating hostile territory. She wore a nurse's scrubs under a worn coat, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who noticed everything. "We're just closing, but I can get you something quick if you're hungry," Evan said, not quite able to turn away someone who looked like they'd had a long shift. "I'm not here for food. I'm here about Maya Reed." The woman's voice was low, urgent. "My name is Linda Patterson. I used to work at County General with Maya before her accident. I heard through the grapevine that you've been helping her." Evan's guard went up instantly. "I don't know what you've heard, but relax, I'm not from Consolidated. I'm one of the people Maya reached out to months ago, asking if I'd be willing to talk about what I saw at County. I said no then because I was scared. I'm still scared, but I can't keep quiet anymore. She pulled out her phone, showed him a photo of a young woman with a bright smile. This is my daughter, Jessica. She's 23. Last week, she went to County General with chest pain. They ran some tests, told her it was anxiety, sent her home. 2 days later, she collapsed. Turned out she had a pulmonary embolism that should have been caught with the first round of tests. She survived, but only because her boyfriend called an ambulance fast enough. Evan looked at the photo, then at Linda's face, seeing the rage and grief there. I'm sorry. When I looked at her chart, I saw charges for tests they never ran, a CT scan that was never performed, consultations with specialists who never saw her. They billed her insurance for thousands in procedures she didn't receive, and they almost killed her because they didn't do the basics. Linda's hands shook as she put her phone away. I've been making excuses for years, telling myself it wasn't my job to fix a broken system, but they almost took my daughter, so I'm done being quiet. Does Maya know you're here? Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first, see if she's still collecting evidence, still fighting, because if she is, I have access to current records. I can get documentation of ongoing fraud that would be much harder for Consolidated to dismiss as old news. Evan felt his pulse quicken. This was exactly what Maya needed. Fresh evidence, a willing witness, someone from inside the system who could corroborate everything. She's still fighting, every day. Then I want to help, but I need to do it carefully. I can't lose my job until we're ready to go public. My daughter's medical bills. Linda's voice cracked. I need the insurance to cover her treatment, but once we have everything we need, once there's a plan, I'll testify. I'll give statements, whatever it takes. Let me get Maya on the phone. Evan called, and Maya answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting by her phone. Evan, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Something's very right. There's someone here you need to talk to. He handed the phone to Linda, watched as the older woman explained who she was and what she was offering. He couldn't hear Maya's side of the conversation, but he saw Linda's expression shift from determined to hopeful to something like relief. Yes, I can meet tonight, Linda said. The warehouse? I'll find it. Thank you, Maya. Thank you for not giving up. She hung up, handed the phone back to Evan. She wants to meet in an hour. Can you take me there? I don't know the area well, and I'd feel safer with company. Of course. Evan locked up the diner, texted Mrs. Chen that he'd be late, and drove Linda through the darkening streets to the warehouse. She was quiet during the ride, staring out the window at the deteriorating neighborhood. This is where Maya's been working? Linda finally asked. In South Harbor? She goes where she's needed. She always did. Even at county, she'd take the cases no one else wanted. The uninsured patients, the complicated surgeries, the people who'd been written off. Administration hated her for it because those cases didn't generate revenue. But the staff loved her because she was the only surgeon who seemed to remember why we all got into medicine in the first place. They arrived at the warehouse to find Maya waiting by the entrance, her wheelchair positioned so she could see approaching vehicles. When she recognized Linda getting out of Evan's truck, her face transformed with emotion. Linda, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe it took me this long. Linda approached and the two women embraced, Maya leaning forward in her chair, Linda bending down, both of them holding on like they were anchoring each other against storms. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. Come inside, Maya said. I'll show you what I've been working on. The clinic was quieter than usual that night, just a handful of patients and Carol managing the treatment area. Maya led them to the evidence room, and Evan watched Linda's face as she took in the wall of documents, the 3 years of investigation laid bare. My God, Maya, you've been doing this alone? Not alone anymore. Evan's been helping. And now you're here. Maya's voice was steady, despite the emotion underneath. Tell me what you have access to. Linda pulled out a flash drive. I started copying files last week after Jessica's incident. Current billing records, patient charts with discrepancies, internal emails discussing revenue targets. It's not everything, but it's a start. And I can get more if you tell me what you need. Maya took the flash drive with trembling hands. This is incredible, Linda. With current records and your testimony, we have a much stronger case. What's the plan? Who are we taking this to? We've been researching investigative journalists, Evan said, looking for someone with the resources and courage to run with this. Maya pulled up her laptop, showed Linda the list they'd compiled. 3 names stood out, reporters who'd built careers on exposing institutional corruption. Sarah Chen at the Washington Post, who'd broken stories about pharmaceutical fraud. Michael Torres at the New York Times, known for healthcare investigations. And Rebecca Williams, an independent journalist whose nonprofit newsroom specialized in long-form investigative pieces. Rebecca Williams, Linda said immediately. I know her work. She did that series on nursing home abuse last year. Comprehensive, damning, and she didn't back down when the companies threatened to sue. She's based in the city too. Maya and Evan exchanged glances. They'd been leaning toward Williams as well, but having Linda confirm the choice gave it weight. Then we reach out to her, Maya said. Carefully. We can't risk tipping off Consolidated before we're ready. I can make initial contact, Linda offered. I'm not on their radar yet. They don't know I'm involved. They spent the next 2 hours strategizing. Linda would reach out to Rebecca Williams through official channels, pitching the story without revealing too much. If Williams expressed interest, they'd arrange a meeting where Maya could present the full scope of evidence. In the meantime, Linda would continue gathering current documentation, building the case that this wasn't just historical wrongdoing, but ongoing criminal activity. We need to be prepared for them to come after us hard once this goes public, Maya warned. Consolidated will use every resource they have to discredit us. They'll dig into our backgrounds, our finances, our personal lives. Linda, they'll come after your job. Evan, they'll escalate beyond health inspections. I'll be painted as a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. Let them come, Linda said fiercely. They almost killed my daughter. I don't care what they do to me. I'm already dealing with their pressure, Evan added. Can't get much worse. Maya looked at both of them, and Evan saw the vulnerability beneath her determination. She'd carried this fight alone for so long that accepting help, truly accepting it, still scared her. But here they were, 3 people who'd been damaged by Consolidated's greed in different ways, coming together to fight back. Okay, Maya said quietly. We do this. Together. That word again. Binding them into something larger than individual grievance. A team. A force. A chance. Linda left shortly after with promises to contact Rebecca Williams first thing in the morning. Evan stayed to help Maya close down the clinic for the night, the familiar routine soothing after the intensity of the evening. Do you really think this could work? Maya asked as they cleaned instruments in the small kitchen area. Or am I setting myself up for another disappointment? I think Linda showing up tonight means something. The universe doesn't usually hand you exactly what you need right when you need it. The universe handed me a drunk driver 3 years ago. Forgive me if I don't trust its timing. Evan paused in his work, turned to face her. The universe also put you in my diner on a Tuesday night, led me to follow you here, brought Linda to us when we needed credible testimony. Maybe it's not about trust. Maybe it's about recognizing opportunities when they appear and having the courage to take them. Maya was quiet for a moment, her hand still in the soapy water. Sarah was lucky to have you. Your son is lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have you. The admission hung in the air between them, more vulnerable than anything she'd said before. Evan moved closer, crouched down so they were eye level. I'm the lucky one. You reminded me that life can be more than just surviving, that I could care about something beyond getting through each day. You gave me purpose, Maya. Don't sell that short. Evan, I need to tell you something. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm falling for you, and it terrifies me because the timing is terrible, and I have so much baggage, and I'm literally paralyzed, and you deserve someone who... He kissed her, gently, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Instead, her hands came up to cup his face, wet and soapy and perfect, and she kissed him back with the kind of desperate intensity that spoke of too many months alone, too many nights wondering if anyone would ever see past the wheelchair to the woman inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evan rested his forehead against hers. You're exactly who I deserve, he said firmly, someone brave and brilliant and stubborn as hell, someone who fights for people who can't fight for themselves, someone who makes me want to be better than I am. The wheelchair? That's the least interesting thing about you. Maya laughed, and it came out half sob. You're gonna wreck me, Evan Carter. Good. You've been too put together for too long. Let someone else carry some of the weight for once. They stayed like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing the same air, letting 3 years of loneliness and grief and fighting begin to transform into something new. Something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Finally, Maya pulled back, wiped her eyes. We should probably talk about this. About us. About what it means and how it affects. Later, Evan interrupted gently. Right now, let's just sit with it. Let it be simple for a few minutes before we make it complicated. Nothing about this is simple. Then let's pretend it is. They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, stealing glances at each other, the air between them charged with new possibility. When everything was put away and the clinic was secure for the night, Evan walked Maya to her van, a modified vehicle with hand controls that she'd bought used and maintained with the same fierce determination she applied to everything. Text me when you get home, he said. I've been getting myself home safely for 3 years. Humor me. She smiled, that transformation of her face that made his heart do complicated things. Okay, I'll text you. I'll text. He watched her drive away, then climbed into his own truck, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He'd kissed Maya, told her she was exactly who he deserved, admitted in everything but words that he was falling for her too. Sarah's face flashed through his mind, her smile, her laugh, the way she'd looked at him like he was capable of anything. He waited for the guilt, the sense that he was betraying her memory by moving forward with someone new. It didn't come. Instead, he felt something that might have been peace. Sarah had loved him enough to want his happiness beyond her own life. She'd made Marcus promise to make sure Evan didn't spend forever alone. This wasn't betrayal. This was honoring what they'd had by refusing to let it make him permanently closed off to connection. His phone buzzed. Home safe, still processing. Don't regret it, though. Evan typed back. Me neither. Sleep well, Maya. You too. And Evan, thank you. For everything. But especially for seeing me. He understood what she meant. Not just physical sight, but the deeper kind. Seeing past disability and damage to the person underneath. Recognizing strength that looked like vulnerability. Valuing her for who she was rather than pitying her for what had been taken. Always, he sent back. Then, because the night had already been full of honesty, he added, I'm falling for you too, just so you know. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared multiple times. Finally, we're either going to save each other or destroy each other. I vote for saving. Me too. Good night, Evan. He drove home through empty streets, his mind too full for sleep despite the late hour. Everything was changing. The careful boundaries he'd maintained between helping Maya and getting personally involved had just dissolved completely. They weren't just allies anymore. They were something more. Something complicated and terrifying and exactly right. Marcus was asleep when Evan got home, Mrs. Chen having put him to bed hours ago. Evan stood in his son's doorway, watching him sleep, wondering how to explain this development. How to introduce the idea that his father had feelings for someone who wasn't his mother. How to make Marcus understand that loving someone new didn't erase who they'd lost. But those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight, Evan let himself feel something he hadn't experienced since Sarah died. Hope. Not just the abstract kind about winning against Consolidated or keeping the clinic running, but personal hope. The possibility that life could include joy again, partnership, love. It was fragile, this new thing between him and Maya, built on shared purpose and late nights and the recognition that sometimes the people most suited for each other are the ones most damaged by life. But fragile didn't mean impossible. The next morning brought confirmation that Linda had sent her email to Rebecca Williams. By afternoon, they had a response. Williams was interested, wanted to meet, suggested a neutral location and time. Evan read Maya's forwarded email 3 times, hardly daring to believe it was real. She wants to meet next Tuesday, Maya texted. Are you free to come with me? Wouldn't miss it. I'm nervous. Me too, but we've got this. You've got 3 years of evidence. Linda's got current documentation. Williams has a reputation for taking on powerful institutions. The pieces are there, Maya. We just need to put them together. When did you become an optimist? When I met someone worth being optimistic about. Even through text, he could sense her smile. Smooth talker. I have my moments. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evan dealt with his tax audit, providing Patricia with every scrap of documentation she requested. The IRS auditor was thorough but professional, and Patricia's confidence that they'd find nothing wrong helped ease some of Evan's stress. The diner continued operating despite the pressure, regular customers showing up with loyalty that touched him more than he could express. Marcus noticed the change in his father's mood. You seem happier, Dad. Did something good happen? Maybe, Evan said carefully. Would it be okay with you if I spent more time with Miss Maya? Not just helping at her work, but maybe as friends who like each other? Marcus considered this with the seriousness he gave all important questions. Like girlfriend and boyfriend? Maybe, eventually, if that's something we both wanted. Does she make you happy? Yeah, buddy, she does. Then it's okay. Mom would want you to be happy. Marcus paused. Plus, Miss Maya is really nice. She always asks about my homework and remembers stuff I tell her. That's important. Out of the mouths of children, Evan pulled his son into a hug, grateful for wisdom that surpassed age. You're pretty great, you know that? I know. You tell me all the time. Tuesday arrived with gray skies threatening rain. Evan met Maya at the coffee shop where they'd arranged to meet Rebecca Williams. Neutral territory, public but private enough for serious conversation. Maya looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with her purse, her professional composure showing cracks. What if she doesn't believe us? What if she thinks we're just conspiracy theorists with an agenda? Then we show her the evidence and let it speak for itself. You've done the work, Maya. You've documented everything. All we need is someone willing to look at it honestly. Rebecca Williams arrived exactly on time, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. She shook their hands firmly, ordered black coffee, and got straight to business. Linda Patterson reached out to me about Consolidated Healthcare, said you have evidence of systematic fraud spanning multiple years. I've done preliminary research, and what I found is interesting but not conclusive. So convince me, why should I invest months of my life and significant resources investigating this company? Maya took a breath, and Evan watched her transform into the surgeon she'd been, confident, precise, commanding. She pulled out her laptop, opened files, and began walking Rebecca through the evidence. Financial discrepancies, billing fraud, patient harm, the whistleblower's testimony, Linda's current documentation showing the practices were ongoing. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking notes, her expression giving nothing away. When Maya finished, silence filled the table. This is extensive, Rebecca finally said, and if even half of it is verifiable, it's explosive. But I need to understand the risks. Consolidated has deep pockets and aggressive legal teams. They'll come after anyone who publishes this. My organization is nonprofit, but we're not bulletproof. Why now? Why are you coming forward after 3 years? Because I found people willing to stand with me, Maya said simply. Because Linda Patterson's daughter almost died from their negligence. Because Evan reminded me that hiding evidence doesn't protect anyone. It just lets the corruption continue. And because I'm tired of being afraid. They already tried to kill me once. What more can they do? The casual mention of the accident hit like a bomb. Rebecca's eyebrows rose. You think your accident wasn't an accident? Maya told her the drunk driver, the convenient timing, the whistleblower's disappearance, the settlement that looked more like hush money. Rebecca's expression shifted from skeptical to disturbed. If you can prove conspiracy, this becomes more than fraud. This becomes a criminal enterprise story. I can't prove it. Not in a way that would hold up in court. But I believe it, and I have circumstantial evidence that's compelling. Maya met Rebecca's eyes directly. I'm not asking you to publish conspiracy theories. I'm asking you to investigate the documented fraud. If that investigation leads to questions about my accident and Robert Chen's disappearance, so be it. But the billing fraud alone is enough to justify this story. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her coffee growing cold as she thought. Finally, she nodded. Okay, I'm in, but I need everything. All your documentation, access to Linda Patterson, any other witnesses willing to talk. This will take months to verify and write properly. And once we publish, Consolidated will come after all of us with everything they have. You need to be prepared for that. We're prepared, Evan said, speaking for the first time. We know what we're risking. Rebecca looked at him curiously. Linda mentioned you run a diner. How did you get involved in this? Maya came to my restaurant asking for leftovers. I followed her one night because I was worried. Found her running an underground clinic. Decided helping her mattered more than staying safe. That's either very brave or very stupid. I've been told both. Rebecca smiled, the first real warmth she'd shown. I like you. You're going to need that stubbornness when Morrison and his people escalate. And they will escalate, make no mistake. The moment they catch wind of this investigation, they'll do everything possible to discredit you, intimidate witnesses, and bury the story. Let them try, Maya said quietly. I've been buried before. I'm still here. They spent another 2 hours going over details, Rebecca asking pointed questions, Maya providing answers with the precision of someone who'd lived with this information for years. When they finally parted ways, Rebecca had copies of everything on encrypted drives, a list of witnesses to contact, and a timeline for publication, tentatively 6 months out, pending verification and legal review. I'll be in touch, Rebecca said as they stood to leave, and thank you for trusting me with this. I won't let you down. After she left, Evan and Maya sat in the coffee shop, both feeling the weight of what they'd just set in motion. There was no going back now. The investigation was happening. The story would be written. And when it published, everything would change. We did it, Maya whispered. We actually got someone to listen. You did it. 3 years of work, refusing to give up, keeping the evidence safe. This is your victory, Maya. It's ours. I couldn't have done this without you. Evan took her hand across the table, not caring who saw. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Together, she echoed, and the word felt like a vow. They left the coffee shop and stepped out into the gray afternoon, rain just beginning to fall. Somewhere in the city, Consolidated Healthcare was conducting business as usual, unaware that their crimes were about to be exposed. Somewhere, Morrison and Burke were plotting their next moves against people they thought they could intimidate into silence. They were wrong. This fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But for the first time in 3 years, Maya wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time since Sarah's death, Evan was fighting for something that mattered as much as survival. They drove back to their separate lives, Maya to the clinic, Evan to the diner, but the connection between them hummed like a live wire. Love, partnership, shared purpose. It was fragile and fierce and exactly what they both needed. The storm was coming, but they would weather it together. The call came at 3 a.m, 2 months after their meeting with Rebecca Williams. Evan fumbled for his phone in the darkness, heart already racing because nothing good happened at 3 a.m. Evan? It's Carol. The clinic. Someone broke in. They trashed everything. Maya's here and she needs you. He was out of bed before Carol finished speaking, pulling on clothes, checking on Marcus, who slept peacefully in the next room, then calling Mrs. Chen with an apology and an emergency that couldn't wait. 10 minutes later, he was in his truck, speeding through empty streets toward the warehouse. The scene that greeted him was devastation. The door had been forced open, the lock broken. Inside, the carefully organized clinic was chaos. Medical supplies scattered across the floor, curtains torn down, equipment smashed. Someone had taken a bat or crowbar to everything they could reach, destroying months of careful work and what must have been minutes of calculated violence. Maya sat in the middle of it all, her wheelchair surrounded by debris, her face blank with shock. Carol and James stood nearby, looking helpless and furious in equal measure. Maya. Evan crossed to her, knelt in the wreckage. Are you hurt? She shook her head slowly. I wasn't here when it happened. Carol called me when the alarm went off. By the time we arrived, they were gone. Her voice was hollow, distant. 3 years of work. Gone. Not gone. Damaged. There's a difference. Evan looked around, assessing. The destruction was extensive, but not complete. The evidence room, he stood quickly, pushed through the debris to the back of the warehouse. The door was hanging off its hinges, the lock smashed. Inside, the filing cabinets had been pried open, papers scattered everywhere. But when he checked the hidden compartment Maya had shown him, a false bottom in one of the cabinets, the backup drives were still there, untouched. Whoever did this had been looking for physical evidence, not knowing Maya had digitized everything months ago. "They didn't get the evidence," he called out. "It's still here." Maya wheeled over, moving carefully through the wreckage. When she saw the intact drives, something cracked in her composure. Tears started flowing, and she covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that had probably been building for years. Evan pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder while Carol called the police, and James started documenting the damage with his phone. They stayed like that for a long time, Maya's tears soaking through his shirt, his arms holding her steady while her world fell apart around them. "They wanted to break me," she finally whispered against his chest. "Show me what happens when you fight back. Make me too afraid to continue." "Did it work?" She pulled back, looked at him with red-rimmed eyes that held more fire than tears now. "No, it made me angrier." "Good. We're going to need that anger." The police arrived, took statements, photographed the damage. The officers were sympathetic but realistic. "Break-ins happen in this neighborhood," they said. "Probably addicts looking for drugs or equipment to sell." They'd file a report, but Evan could see they didn't expect to catch anyone. After they left, the four of them, Evan, Maya, Carol, and James, stood surveying the destruction. "We rebuild," Carol said firmly. "This clinic serves too many people to let some thugs shut us down." "With what money?" Maya's voice was tired. "The equipment alone will cost thousands to replace. Medical supplies, furniture, everything. I don't have those resources." "Then we fundraise," James suggested. "Tell the community what happened. People will help. If we go public about the clinic, the city will shut us down for operating without proper permits." Maya gestured at the wreckage. "This might have done Morrison's job for him. He doesn't need to expose us if we're already destroyed." Evan thought about Morrison and Burke, about the timing of this attack coming right when Rebecca Williams was deep into her investigation, about how convenient it was that the evidence room had been specifically targeted. This wasn't random. This was consolidated, sending a message. "We tell Rebecca what happened," he said. "Document this as part of the story. Corporate intimidation, destruction of property, attempted suppression of evidence. It strengthens the narrative." "It also shows we're vulnerable," Maya countered, "that they can get to us. Or it shows we're worth attacking, that what we have scares them enough to take risks." Evan pulled out his phone, started taking his own photos. "This is evidence too, Maya. Use it." She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, call Rebecca. Tell her what happened. And Carol, James, start making a list of what we need to rebuild. If we're doing this, we do it right." Dawn was breaking when Evan finally left the warehouse, exhausted and covered in dust from helping salvage what they could. Maya had refused to leave, determined to stay and protect what remained. He'd argued, but she'd been immovable, and finally he'd just made her promise to rest and call if anything else happened. The diner opened late that morning, Evan running on coffee and adrenaline. Marcus noticed his father's distraction immediately. "Something bad happened to Miss Maya's work, didn't it?" Evan paused in wiping down the counter. "What makes you say that?" "You have your worried face, the same one from when Mom was in the hospital." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes showed concern beyond his years. "Is she okay?" "She's okay, buddy, but yeah, someone damaged the place where she helps people. She's upset and we need to figure out how to fix it." "Can I help?" The question caught Evan off guard. "How?" "I have money for my birthday. Grandma and Grandpa sent me $50. I could give that to Miss Maya for supplies." Evan's throat tightened. His son, offering everything he had to help someone he barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. Sarah would have been so proud. "That's incredibly generous, Marcus, but you should save that money for something you want." "I want to help. Mom used to say the best way to use money is to help people who need it more than you do. Miss Maya needs it more than I need a new video game." Evan crouched down to his son's level. "You're a good kid, you know that?" "You tell me all the time," Marcus said, echoing his usual response, but his smile was uncertain. "Is Miss Maya going to be okay? Really okay?" "I think so. She's one of the strongest people I know, and she's not fighting alone anymore." Because she has you. Because she has all of us. You, me, the people who work with her. That makes a difference. Marcus nodded solemnly. Tell her I want to help, even if it's just my birthday money. That afternoon, Rebecca Williams called. She'd received Evan's email about the break-in, along with the photos and police report number. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. This confirms what I've been finding in my investigation. Consolidated has a pattern of aggressive tactics against anyone who threatens them. Lawsuits, intimidation, property damage. There's a paper trail of former employees who tried to speak out and suddenly faced financial ruin or worse. Worse meaning what? Meaning accidents, break-ins, threats against family members. Nothing directly traceable to Consolidated, but the pattern is clear. They don't just defend themselves legally, they destroy their enemies. Evan thought about Maya's accident, about Robert Chen's disappearance. Can you prove it? Not yet. But I'm working on it. And this attack on the clinic, it's reckless. They're getting desperate, which means we're close to something they really don't want exposed. Rebecca paused. How's Maya holding up? She's angry, which is probably better than broken. Good. Tell her I'm accelerating the timeline. I was planning to publish in 4 months, but given these developments, I want to move faster. 2 months, maybe less. The longer we wait, the more opportunities Consolidated has to do damage. What do you need from us? Stay safe. Document everything and be prepared. When this story hits, it's going to be big. National coverage, congressional investigations, the works. Your lives are going to change. After hanging up, Evan sat in the quiet diner processing. 2 months. In 2 months, everything Maya had fought for would go public. Consolidated would be exposed. And the 3 years of hiding, of carrying this burden alone, would finally end. But first they had to survive those 2 months. He called Maya. Rebecca's accelerating the timeline. 2 months until publication. 2 months. Maya's voice was raw from crying and shouting orders at volunteers who'd started showing up to help clean. Evan, I don't know if the clinic can survive 2 months. The damage is extensive. Even with fundraising, we're looking at weeks of rebuilding. Then we get creative. What if we didn't rebuild here? What if we found a new location, something more legitimate? With what money? And any permanent location would require permits, licenses, oversight. What if that's not a bad thing? Evan said slowly, an idea forming. What if instead of hiding, we go semi-public, partner with an existing nonprofit, operate as a legitimate satellite clinic? It would give us protection, harder for Consolidated to attack us if we're part of a registered organization. Maya was quiet, thinking. That could work, but we'd need a nonprofit willing to take the risk. Most organizations won't want to touch anything connected to someone investigating Consolidated. Leave that to me. I know some people. Over the next week, Evan made calls, reached out to contacts he'd built over years of running the diner and serving the community. He talked to nonprofit directors, healthcare advocates, community organizers. Most were sympathetic but cautious. Consolidated's reach was long, and no one wanted to become a target. Then he talked to Father Miguel at St. Catherine's, the church 3 blocks from the diner. Miguel ran a community outreach program that included a small health clinic. He listened to Evan's pitch, Maya's skills, the underserved population, the need for expanded services, without mentioning Consolidated or the investigation. This doctor, she's legitimate? Licensed? She was one of the best trauma surgeons in the state before her accident. She still has her medical license, just can't practice in traditional settings due to physical limitations. And she's currently operating an underground clinic in a warehouse. Evan hesitated, then decided on honesty. Yes, because the system locked her out and people were dying. She chose to help them anyway. Miguel smiled. I like her already. Bring her to meet me. Let's see if we can make something work. The meeting happened 2 days later. Maya was nervous, her professional composure barely hiding her desperation. St. Catherine's Clinic was small but clean, serving primarily the elderly and immigrant population with basic health care. Miguel listened to Maya's vision, expanded services, weekend hours, treatment for the homeless and uninsured, and nodded thoughtfully. I can offer you space, legitimacy, and protection under the church's nonprofit status. In exchange, you provide medical expertise and help us expand our mission. You'd be an independent contractor, not an employee, which gives you flexibility. And the church has lawyers, good ones, who aren't afraid of corporations. Why would you take this risk? Maya asked. You don't know me. And the people I'm fighting, they're dangerous. Because I've been a priest in South Harbor for 20 years, and I've watched too many people suffer because they couldn't afford basic health care. If you're willing to help them, I'm willing to stand beside you. Miguel's expression was firm. Besides, I've dealt with powerful interests before. The church has survived worse than corporate bullies. Maya looked at Evan, who nodded encouragement. Then she turned back to Miguel and extended her hand. You have a deal. The transition happened quickly. Volunteers from the warehouse helped move salvageable equipment to St. Catherine's. The church's clinic space was expanded using parish hall rooms that had been sitting empty. Linda Patterson quietly funneled donated medical supplies through her hospital connections. Within 3 weeks, Maya was operating a legitimate clinic under St. Catherine's umbrella, treating patients openly rather than in hiding. The change was transformative. No more shadows, no more fear of discovery. Patients could come during daylight hours. Maya could advertise services, partner with other healthcare providers, operate the way a clinic should operate. But the target on their backs hadn't disappeared. Morrison and Burke showed up at the diner one afternoon, their expressions harder than before. Mr. Carter, we heard about the unfortunate incident at the warehouse. Terrible thing, break-ins. Morrison's smile was cold. We also heard Dr. Reed has relocated to St. Catherine's. Quite a step up. What do you want, Morrison? The same thing we've always wanted, a conversation with Dr. Reed. We're prepared to make a very generous offer. Not just consulting work, but funding for her new clinic. Full legitimacy. Resources that would transform it into something truly special. All she has to do is meet with us. And sign away her rights to speak about Consolidated's crimes. Morrison's expression didn't change. That's a harsh characterization of standard business agreements. We simply believe in protecting proprietary information and maintaining confidentiality. She's not interested. Mr. Carter, you're making this harder than it needs to be. The tax audit, the health inspections, those are just the beginning. We can make your life much more difficult, or we can make it much easier. Your choice. Burke stepped closer, his presence intimidating. You have a son, don't you? Marcus? 7 years old, goes to Lincoln Elementary? The implied threat made Evan's vision go red. He moved before thinking, getting in Burke's face despite the size difference. You go near my son, and I will burn your world down. Evidence, investigation, legal consequences, none of it will matter because I will personally make you regret every decision that led you to this moment. For the first time, Burke looked uncertain. Morrison pulled him back. No one's threatening your son, Mr. Carter. We're simply noting that you have responsibilities beyond playing hero. Think about what's best for your family. They left, but the message was clear. The stakes had escalated beyond property damage. They were coming after what mattered most. Evan called Maya immediately, told her about the veiled threat against Marcus. He expected fear, maybe regret that he'd gotten involved. Instead, her voice came through steel hard and determined. That's it. We're done playing defense. Rebecca said 2 months. We're not waiting that long. I want the story published as soon as possible. Maya, they threatened your son, Evan. Your child. There's no coming back from that. No forgiveness. We end this now. Evan had never loved her more than in that moment. Not just anger for her own sake, but fury on behalf of his family. Protection that went beyond self-interest into something fierce and loyal. I'll call Rebecca. See how fast she can move. Rebecca, when she heard about the threat against Marcus, shared Maya's rage. I can have the story ready in 2 weeks. It won't be as polished as I'd like, but it'll be thorough and it'll be devastating. If we're doing this, we do it right, but we do it fast. Those 2 weeks were the longest of Evan's life. He kept Marcus close, varied his routines, stayed vigilant for any sign of surveillance or danger. The clinic operated under heightened security, James always present, Father Miguel making it clear to anyone watching that St. Catherine's was protected by more than just legal rights. Maya worked with Rebecca constantly, verifying facts, providing additional documentation, preparing for the inevitable backlash. Linda Patterson gave an on-record interview speaking about her daughter's near-death experience and the fraudulent billing. Other witnesses came forward, former Consolidated employees who'd been waiting for someone brave enough to speak first. The night before publication, Evan and Maya sat in the empty clinic, surrounded by the work they'd built together. "Tomorrow everything changes," Maya said quietly. "No going back." "No going back," Evan agreed. "Any regrets?" "None. You?" He thought about the last few months, the pressure, the threats, the constant fear, but also the purpose, the connection, the knowledge that he was fighting for something that mattered. And Maya, brilliant, brave, beautiful Maya, who'd reminded him what it meant to truly live. Not a single one. She wheeled closer, took his hand. "When this is over, when the dust settles, can we talk about us? About what we are and what we could be?" "We're already something," Evan said. "We have been for a while." "I know, but I want to make it official. Meet Marcus properly as more than just your friend. Figure out how a paralyzed doctor and a diner owner make a life together. We figure it out the same way we've figured everything else out. Together, one day at a time, refusing to give up when things get hard." Maya smiled through tears. "I love you, Evan Carter. I probably shouldn't say it now before the chaos hits, but I do. You saved me. Not from the wheelchair or the loneliness, but from giving up. From accepting that hiding was the same as surviving. I love you too. And you saved me right back. From grief that was slowly killing me. From believing that just getting through each day was enough. You showed me life could still have purpose and joy and possibility." They kissed, soft and gentle and full of promise. Tomorrow the world would know Consolidated's crimes. Tomorrow the investigations would begin. The lawsuits would fly. The empire would start to crumble. Tomorrow their lives would transform in ways they couldn't predict. But tonight they had this. Two people who'd been broken by the world choosing to heal together. The article published at 6 a.m. By 7, it was trending nationally. By 8, news crews were camped outside St. Catherine's and Consolidated's headquarters. By 9, congressional representatives were calling for investigations. Rebecca's reporting was comprehensive and damning. Billing fraud totaling hundreds of millions. Patient harm documented across multiple facilities. The whistleblower's disappearance and suspicious circumstances around Maya's accident. Linda Patterson's daughter's case as a recent example of ongoing criminal negligence. 3 years of systematic corruption, laid bare with irrefutable evidence. Consolidated stock plummeted. Their CEO issued a defensive statement denying everything, but the evidence was too strong. By afternoon, the FBI announced they were opening an investigation. By evening, lawsuits were being filed by patients who'd been defrauded. Morrison and Burke didn't show up at the diner. They were too busy with their own problems, federal agents asking uncomfortable questions, lawyers trying to manage a crisis that was spiraling beyond control. The clinic was flooded with donations. People who'd read the story and wanted to support Maya's work. Foundations offering grants, medical supply companies providing equipment. Within days, St. Catherine's Clinic went from struggling to sustainable, able to expand services and hire additional staff. 2 months after publication, Consolidated Healthcare's leadership was facing criminal charges. The company was being broken up, sold off in pieces to cover lawsuits and penalties. Morrison had flipped, testifying against executives in exchange for a lighter sentence. The drunk driver who'd hit Maya was being reinvestigated, financial records showing payments that couldn't be explained. Justice. Slow and imperfect, but real. Through it all, Evan and Maya built something new. Not just the clinic, but a family. Marcus took to Maya with the easy acceptance of a child who'd been waiting for his father to be happy again. She taught him about medicine, he taught her about second-grade politics and the importance of Pokemon cards. They fit together like pieces that had always belonged to the same puzzle. 6 months after the article published, on a quiet Sunday afternoon at the clinic, Maya pulled Evan aside. "I have something to tell you, something big." His heart jumped. Good big or bad big? Terrifying big, wonderful big, completely unexpected big. She took a breath. "The National Medical Board reviewed my case. They want to create a position for me, consulting trauma surgeon for complex cases. I'd review charts, provide expert analysis, train other surgeons. Everything I can do for my wheelchair, using the skills I thought I'd lost forever." Evan's face split into a grin. "Maya, that's incredible. There's more. They're basing the program here in South Harbor. partnering with St. Catherine's to create a teaching clinic that serves the underserved while training the next generation of doctors to see patients as people, not profit centers. It's everything I've dreamed of, a real chance to change how medicine is practiced. Then why do you look worried? Because it's a lot, a major commitment, and I want to make sure, she paused, gathering courage. I want to make sure you and Marcus are okay with my life getting complicated again, with me having less time, more responsibility. I don't want to lose what we've built. Evan pulled her close, kissed her forehead. You're not going to lose us. We're not going anywhere. Your success, your purpose, that's part of why I love you. I'm not going to ask you to be less than you are. Even if it means chaos? Especially if it means chaos. We've gotten pretty good at handling that. 1 year after Rebecca's article, Evan stood in St. Catherine's Chapel, watching Maya wheel down the aisle toward him. She wore a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, a smile that could light up the world. Marcus walked beside her as ring bearer, taking his job with absolute seriousness. The ceremony was small, just close friends, clinic staff, Father Miguel officiating, Carol and James, Linda Patterson, Rebecca Williams, the people who'd stood beside them through the fight. When Miguel asked if they would love and cherish each other through whatever challenges came, they answered together, their voices strong. We will. Because they'd already proven it. Through corporate attacks and broken clinics and threats against everything they held dear. Through fear and anger and the slow, difficult work of building something good from ruins. They'd proven that love wasn't just feeling, but action, commitment, choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. At the reception in the parish hall, Marcus gave a toast that made everyone cry. My mom told me before she died that Dad would find someone who makes him smile again. She was right. Maya makes him smile. She makes me smile too, and she helps people, which Mom said was the most important thing you could do. So I'm really happy she's my new mom. Even though she can't play basketball because of her wheelchair, she's really good at video games, and that's what matters. Maya laughed through tears, pulled Marcus into a hug. Evan watched them, his son and his wife, his family, rebuilt from fragments, and felt gratitude so profound it hurt. Later as they danced, Maya in her wheelchair, Evan standing close, moving to music only they could hear, she looked up at him with wonder. We actually made it. Through everything, we made it. Did you doubt we would? Every single day, right up until I didn't anymore. When was that? The first time you showed up at the clinic with food? When you refused to walk away even though it would have been safer? When you looked at me and saw strength instead of limitation? She touched his face gently. You changed everything, Evan Carter. You and your stubborn refusal to let me fight alone. You changed everything for me too. Gave me a reason to care about more than just surviving. Showed me that broken people can still build beautiful things. They stayed like that, swaying in the middle of the parish hall, surrounded by people who'd become family through shared struggle and triumph. The clinic would open tomorrow, serving people who needed them. The investigation would continue, more charges being filed. Life would be complicated and challenging and full of work, but it would also be full of love, purpose, the knowledge that they'd fought for something that mattered and won. Outside, South Harbor continued its slow transformation. The neighborhood wasn't fixed, wouldn't be fixed for years, maybe decades. But St. Catherine's Clinic was a light in the darkness, proof that caring about people could change lives, that refusing to accept injustice could make a difference. Years later, when people asked how they'd survived going up against a corporation as powerful as Consolidated Healthcare, Maya and Evan would give the same answer. We didn't do it alone, and we never gave up. Because that was the truth, not a fairy tale about heroes defeating villains, but the reality of ordinary people making extraordinary choices, of a widowed father and a paralyzed doctor finding each other, and deciding that together they were stronger than any force trying to break them. Marcus grew up watching his father and stepmother build something meaningful from nothing. He learned that strength came in many forms, that wheelchairs didn't define capability, that love meant standing beside someone through their battles. He went to medical school eventually, driven by Maya's example, determined to practice medicine with the same compassion and integrity she'd shown him. The clinic expanded, trained hundreds of doctors, saved thousands of lives. Maya's consulting work transformed trauma surgery protocols across the country. Evan's Diner became a neighborhood institution, a place where everyone was welcome and no one went hungry. And through it all, they stayed together. Through challenges and celebrations, through hard days and joyful ones, through the ordinary magic of building a life with someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway. What had started with leftovers and suspicion had become something neither could have imagined. A family forged in fire, a love built on shared purpose, a legacy of healing that would outlast them both. Two broken people, discarded by a world that valued profit over humanity, had proven the world wrong. They hadn't just survived, they'd triumphed, and in doing so, they'd shown everyone watching that the strongest heroes are often the ones no one thinks to look at twice. The single father running a struggling diner, the woman in a wheelchair asking for leftovers, the ordinary people who choose extraordinary courage when faced with impossible odds. Their story became legend in South Harbor and beyond, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because it reminded people that change comes from those willing to fight for it, that justice belongs to those brave enough to demand it, and that love, real love, chooses to see strength where others see only weakness. The clinic's waiting room held a plaque, installed 5 years after that first article published. It read simply, "In memory of Sarah Carter, who taught us that the best way to honor those we've lost is to live lives that would make them proud. And in celebration of Maya Reed and Evan Carter, who proved that broken things, when mended together, become stronger than they ever were alone." Beneath it, patients waited to be seen, doctors trained in compassionate care, volunteers gave their time. And in the back office, Maya reviewed charts while Evan brought her coffee. Still terrible coffee, she'd tease, but made with love. This was their victory, not dramatic or sudden, but sustained and meaningful. A quiet revolution built on the radical idea that every person deserves dignity, care, and a chance to be seen. They'd started with nothing but hope and determination. They'd built everything that mattered, and their story of love found in unlikely places, of justice claimed against impossible odds, of families rebuilt from ruins, would inspire others long after their names faded from headlines. Because in the end, that's what real heroes do. They show up. They stay. They fight. And they prove, one difficult day at a time, that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to accept that the world has to stay broken. Maya and Evan had refused, and the world was better for it.